All 8 billion of us are doing metabolism at all times. This show is about learning what metabolism is, how it affects you in every way possible, from mood and mental state to performance and energy. We are all about fine-tuning the human experience for you to achieve the best self you can be. And if you are someone who loves science, curious to know how your body works and how to optimize it, then you are in the right place. This is the H.V.M.N Podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back to the H.V.M.N Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Latt Mansor, a PhD in Physiology, Anatomy and Genetics, and the research lead of Health via Modern Nutrition. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review, and if you have any question, leave us a comment, and as always, we appreciate it if you can share it with a friend. Now, without further ado, let's get into this episode of H.V.M.N Podcast. In this episode, we have Dr. Jade Teta, who holds a doctoral degree in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University, an undergraduate degree in biochemistry, and many life coaching certifications. He has spent 20 years in the natural health, fitness, and fat loss industry, having worked as a physician, personal trainer, wellness consultant, and nutrition coach. He is a best-selling author of numerous books, including Next Level Metabolism, Human 365, and The Metabolic Effect Diet, which was ranked by Time magazine as one of the top diet books in 2010. Currently, he is the Chief Metabolic Architect at Metabolic Living and founder of Next Level Human. He is also a podcast host at the Next Level Human podcast, available anywhere podcasts can be found. In this episode, we talked about his background as a naturopathic medicine doctor. What is evidence-based medicine, and how can you, as a listener, can adopt his expertise and experience to improve your own health? And I hope you will enjoy this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Hello, we have Dr. Jade Teta here today. Welcome to the Health via Modern Nutrition podcast.
What's going on, Latt? It's good to see you, my friend. I'm excited about this conversation. It's always fun getting a chance to catch up with you.
Yeah, it has been a while, and I was on your podcast, the Next Level Human podcast. We had a blast. I had a great conversation around metabolic health, ketones, and the work that you do as well. So I'm really excited to be interviewing you today because I know there are right before we press the record button, you just updated me with a bunch of updates in your life that is so exciting that I can't wait to get to know more of. And I'm sure our audience would love to hear more on how you treat your patients, how you see life in general, and most importantly, one thing that you mentioned earlier that I noticed that I really want to touch upon is how you view suffering and make it into fulfillment, and that was really powerful. So, without further ado, why don't you tell our audience what your background and what your story is?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, man. It's really good to be here, and I'm excited to meet all of your listeners. And for those of you listening who have not heard of me, let me just give you a brief background. So I started in the health and fitness industry at 15 years old. So a lot of people's eyebrows raise when they hear that, but literally that's when I started personal training. And the reason I say 15 years old, because that's the first time I remember getting paid to do this work. So I started writing health and fitness programs for the people on my football team. That started making me write programs for their family members, and that developed my interest in health and fitness. So when it came time to go to undergrad, I did a biochem degree, and then I hit a little bit of a snag because I wanted to go into medical school. But when I began to get ready to apply, for some reason, Latt, I don't know why, but I never looked at the curriculum of traditional medical school at that point. And just to kind of give you all a sense of what years we're talking about, this will be the 1996-1997 time period. And so I'm looking at the medical school curriculum, and on my way to East Carolina University, I had an advisor there who I'd been working with in his lab, his biochem lab, and I didn't see not one course in nutrition, not one course in exercise, and nothing in psychology and mindset. And for whatever reason, that kind of blew my mind. And so I decided that I was not going that route. And at this time, I found a little known school called Bastyr University that trains naturopathic physicians. These doctors are people you could think of as your primary care physicians who specialize in diet, exercise, and lifestyle. And at that time, it was not something that you wanted really to tell people. Even my family was like, Jade, don't do that. That's like witchcraft medicine. Of course, I had no idea that it was going to become so mainstream, 20 years after, now I graduated in 2004. So 20 years later, it's become mainstream. So if you take that personal training background, sort of I'm a gym guy and, someone who loves to spend time in the gym, and, take that naturopathic background and then add into that philosophy and psychology. I'm actually currently getting my PhD in transpersonal psychology. And it's mainly because, Latt, and this will get us into the conversation, from my perspective, as I worked as a personal trainer, as I worked as, a naturopathic physician in the clinic and still do, as I began writing books and programs and all of these things, I started to look and see something that was kind of counterintuitive and bothered me a little bit, but eventually I saw it as the path to health and fitness. Now, here's the hook to this. When most people think about optimized health and fitness, what they're focusing on is diet and exercise and lifestyle. And of course, you and I know that is critically important. But one of the things I saw is incredibly healthy people who, when I looked at their lifestyles, didn't look that healthy on paper. And I also saw in my clinic plenty of people who were doing everything right and were also getting ill. And so this bothered me an awful lot. I didn't understand how we could have, people who essentially were doing all the right things by the book, but still were not living happy, fulfilled, healthy lives. And the other thing about that, Latt, by the way, that was, kind of, upsetting in a sense when you work in the clinic, is that we humans get sick and die regardless, right? No matter how healthy we are, there is going to be an end to this at some point. And so I started looking at what were the difference makers, what was really making the big difference. And my conclusion, which was kind of shocking to me and may or may not be shocking to your listeners, is that mindset was driving an awful lot of this. Of course, not all of it, but a lot of what I was seeing in these disconnects between people who were healthy but were also ill and people who were, sort of not ill but living not great lifestyles was in the way they approached life. And I also saw a very big difference I worked a lot with cancer early on in my clinic work. And what I also saw is that a lot of these people were struggling mightily with the questions about life. What did I do with my life? What comes next? Did I make a difference? Did I matter? Coming to terms with all the dysfunction and wounds of their childhood and all the things that we humans have to deal with. And so, to sum all this up for you, my work really is a combination of this journey that I've taken. Lifestyle-oriented physician who also has delved deep into the suffering of humans and why mindset and how mindset plays a role in health and fitness. And so this has been my journey, and it's been a beautiful one, something that I love, but it has been sort of a roundabout one and a confusing one at times as well. But hopefully that gives you all sort of an understanding. My work, I say, is mindset, muscle, and metabolism. It really goes through those three things: metabolism, muscle and fitness, and mindset. And that's where I spend most of my work now.
That's a great story, Jade. And, you pointed out something very interesting here. And that's something that I increasingly notice in today's world, as well as from interviewing all these experts on our H.V.M.N Podcast and reading all the studies around this, is that mindset or mental health is so tightly connected to metabolic health, and one affects the other so strongly that most of the time, like growing up learning science, we often segregate systems because it makes things easier to study. It simplifies things. It makes things in a linear manner where we can just say this pathway, glucose gets broken down into pyruvate, gets broken down, and creates ATP. But in reality is that we are one big web of different systems that interconnects with each other. Now, let me ask you about naturopathic medicine. Because I know how detail oriented you are. So I'm going to show you off a little bit here and tell our listeners, how much of naturopathic medicine is based off of evidence and science, and how much of it is what people believe, like you said, witchcraft or like woo woo? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, this is going to probably get me in trouble with some of my colleagues, Latt. But so from my perspective, when I went into naturopathic medical school, I went in as a very evidence-based guy. And what I found out pretty quickly is that while there was much evidence there was also a lot of things that were troublesome from my perspective. And so I would say sort of early on, it was 50-50 for me. Things that I could find evidence for and use, and things for which I really didn't find any evidence for at all. Now, to be very clear, when I think of evidence-based medicine, I think of three things, because most people, when they think of evidence-based medicine, they just think of the research body. But the real definition of evidence-based medicine is, what does the current body of research say? What is the sort of individual nature and situation of the patient that we're looking at? And then also, what is my clinical experience? Taking all that into account, I certainly wasn't discounting some of what the naturopathic world was saying from a clinical perspective, but I was not necessarily seeing any of that in evidence. Now, as time has gone on, we've seen that change pretty dramatically, but I would still say that naturopathic medicine suffers from what I also would say conventional medicine suffers from, just in a different way. That it is sometimes using things and doing things that aren't necessarily in this evidence base. For example, on the naturopathic side of things, what will happen oftentimes is people say, follow this diet, take this supplement. We may not have the evidence for that. Now, on the conventional side of things, doctors will say, take this drug, do this surgery, and not necessarily be looking at some of the lifestyle things for which we have evidence for. And so from my perspective, what I have quickly done, which I know an awful lot about you as well, and so I think you and I came from maybe two different directions. What I did was I started moving more from naturopathic medicine a little bit more towards conventional medicine, whereas someone like you might be moving a little bit more from conventional medicine into naturopathic medicine, into a zone that I think is most aptly called now functional medicine. Long before we get to disease, we have dysfunction. And just for the listeners, I'll give you an example here. Let's say we're talking about diabetes. Now, if I measure a fasting blood glucose level of 126 on two separate occasions, then I can diagnose you with diabetes. However, if you have a blood sugar level in the 1-teens, 119, 120, I might not be able to diagnose you with diabetes, but I know there's some dysfunction going on. There's some dysglycemia, there's some insulin resistance, there's some issues happening that will one day lead to diabetes. And by the way, that dysfunction certainly is going to be causing disease further down the line. And so from my perspective, when I begin to look at this, functional medicine is probably the best descriptor for what I do now. So I'm one of these people who takes all the evidence available to me and matches it with the individual. Now, think about this for a second. We are each uniquely different. We are as different on the inside chemically as we are on the outside physically. And we differ in our physiology, we differ in our psychology, and perhaps more importantly, and not necessarily thought about as much, we differ in our personal preferences and in our practical circumstances. And so from my perspective, we can take this functional medicine evidence base, but it still needs to be matched to the individual. And so if you want my pet peeve and the listeners to kind of know, well, Jade, where do you come down on this? I see big problems both in the conventional medicine world and in the naturopathic medicine world because I don't see them doing individualized medicine even at this juncture in 2023, 2024. I still don't see that. I see it still being mostly cookbook medicine. Follow this diet, take this particular supplement, take this particular drug, instead of going, what is the thing that's keeping this person from living the lifestyle necessary to give them optimal health? We must match the individual physiology, psychology, personal preferences, and practical circumstances of the person with the optimal environment. Things like mindset, movement, metabolics like exercise, supplements, things like that, and what they're eating, meals. And this is how we begin this individualized medicine. And one final thing I'll say there, which ties in the psychology piece, if somebody believes that their diet an exercise and lifestyle program is going to be effective, it has a much greater chance of doing that. We can look at the work of Aaliyah Crum, and for those of you who don't know Aaliyah Crum, I believe she's out of Stanford University, but I'll just briefly walk them through this one study, Latt, so we can see how powerful mindset is. And so what this particular study that I'm going to talk about, it's a pretty popular study. I know Latt knows it, but many of you who are listening may not. They call it the milkshake study. And so what Dr. Crum did is essentially bring people in, measure their stress hormone levels, measure their hunger hormone levels, hormones like cortisol and ghrelin, and then also measured their hunger responses subjectively. How hungry do you feel? After getting 2 different milkshakes. Milkshake 1 was a very low calorie milkshake, light calorie diet chocolate shake. People drank that shake, and then they were measured subjectively. How hungry do you feel? How full do you feel? And what happened with ghrelin and cortisol? Now, the other group got a high-calorie, decadent chocolate shake, and this was then measured also. How subjectively do you feel? How full are you? What are your hunger hormones doing? What are your cortisol levels doing? Now, unbeknownst to the subjects, this chocolate shake was exactly the same thing, just labeled differently. However, what they saw biochemically happen is that the expectation of the people getting the high-calorie decadent chocolate shake was that they would be more full, and they were. And we also saw ghrelin levels drop, the hunger hormone ghrelin drop as a result of that. Now, the people who thought they were getting the low-calorie shake saw the exact opposite effect. Ghrelin levels stayed high. Subjective hunger was more. Fullness was less. Now, this was exactly the same shake, basically labeled differently, and we saw real-time subjective, but more importantly, objective hormonal changes in these people, indicating what they believed about the diet. And so not only do we need to take into account personal preference, practical circumstances, our individual physiology and psychology, as well as the choices we make, we also have to take into account what we believe about the choices we make. And this is what interests me the most, because I don't think when we look at the total body of evidence, and my clinical experience tells me that most people are taking these things into account when they are looking after their health and fitness. I also feel like most physicians are perhaps missing this. And so to me, this is a relatively new conversation that we need to have. And this is what I'm most interested in my work.
Let's dig into that. Let's hold on to that. And I would love to hear your thought on the mechanism of action, what you think that belief system leads to an objective biochemical reaction, right? But I knew you were the right person for me to ask that question. That was a great explanation. And I'll tell you why I like the way you approach health and fitness, because one, as you said, you're evidence-based, but at the same time, you're not forgetting the wholesome view of naturopathic medicine in assessing the whole situation, right? Because when we have metabolic disease, we already had a long-term metabolic dysfunction, and that may be caused by multitude of aspects in our lifestyles, whether it's nutrition, physical activity, stress management, or sleep management, and they all coalesce into this big symptom that cause dysfunction, and then over time cause the disease to manifest, essentially. Because I was asked this question on Chase Tuning's Ever for Radio podcast, and he asked me, what's the difference between metabolic disease and metabolic dysfunction? And I simply say that if you are not diagnosed with metabolic disease, but you are going towards that direction, as you said earlier, the dysfunction is there. It's not, absent, like you said, if that is just a arbitrary number, for example, for diabetes, an arbitrary number of blood glucose that we basically say that this is the threshold that you have to pass in order to be diagnosed as a diabetic individual. But that doesn't mean that insulin resistance does not happen until that last minute. It probably has been manifesting, has been progressing over the course of 15 years. That's what they have been, the research have been shown. And you are absolutely right. I I came from the complete opposite, the conventional scientific background, because that's what I do. I did research in labs. I really look at mechanistic and mechanism of action and really investigative efforts around science in health and metabolism. And now, as a research lead for H.V.M.N, I definitely come to understand more on the importance of naturopathic or functional medicine, and really looking at an overall view of health and fitness, not just using a drug to treat a symptom, rather going back to the root cause and fix that instead. I just had this week's episode on H.V.M.N Podcast, I interviewed Dr. Terry Walls, and she recovered from multiple sclerosis herself using interventions in her lifestyle, in diet, in exercise and management and all stress management and all of that. And now she's using the same exact method to treat her patients, as well as running clinical trials to really prove the effectiveness, the efficiency of these methods. Now, granted, I did ask her what does she think is the mechanism of action for this treatment. And as we all know, multiple sclerosis may have many causes, and as such, we cannot pinpoint the exact root cause to fix. And similarly, the treatment that she use multiple approaches, from lifestyle, from exercise to diet to counseling and everything, and mindset. She can't also pinpoint the exact turning point, the exact knob that you are pushing in that cures the disease. So this is where I think the field of medicine and health becomes more and more interesting, because what we learn in school as we go towards a PhD is when we narrow in onto a niche area and specialize so much into this siloed area that we forget that the body is a system. It's an interconnection of different systems. And then now we have to, zoom out again and look at it as a whole system. It's sort of come full circle.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, because I think the listener and many of my patients don't quite understand this. They don't understand that, for example, with Dr. Walls, she's changing diet. She's changing her exercise. Just diet alone. If we're a researcher trying to study this, it is impossible to break down every single constituent and know what is what. Not only that, one of the things I'll share with them as well, although I know that you do, Latt, is that when you think about nutrition, it's really interesting, because from my perspective, those who do research in the nutrition space, it's the most difficult area to do research in, because there's so many different parameters. And think about this, just you listeners. Think about us. If Latt and I were designing a study to try to determine a particular diet being effective, we would need relatively long-term studies. We'd also need to know every single element that this person was eating, and they would have to be consistent with it. We'd then have to have another group, if we were going to do this right, who's doing the opposite, and we need to track them to see these major differences. And so really, when we do these studies, we would want to isolate just one variable in that way, and that's hard enough. Now try doing it across multiple variables, micronutrients, countless numbers of them, the macronutrients, the calories, all these different aspects of this. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much confusion in nutrition research, where one year we are told X, Y, or Z, and the next 10 years later we're believing A, B, and C. And this is simply the nature of nutrition research. Now, this is not to say it's not beneficial, it's not useful, it's not giving us valuable information. But I do think what you're speaking to here, Latt, is that science has yet to adopt a research methodology that adequately addresses multiple components in something like nutrition. Now, when you add in exercise on top of that, and mindset, and this whole lifestyle effect, it becomes even more difficult. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. This just means that this is part of the difficulty when you're doing research. And so how do we fill that gap? Well, as clinicians, we fill that gap through our clinical experience. We begin to work with people, we see certain things, and we begin to say, this looks like it might be something that works. And that's why I oftentimes say, with me, I never use research really to define my approach. It almost always is refining my approach instead. And so I do what I do in clinic because I see what works, realizing that I have biases and things that I can't necessarily see. I don't know what I don't know. But then when research comes along to correct or adjust my approach, I will simply use that. And so I'm using my own judgment, I'm using the individual in front of me, and then I'm using the evidence base in a way that refines my approach into medicine. Now, the final thing I would say here is we shouldn't let this get us depressed. We shouldn't be in this position where we're like, oh my God, let's just throw our arms up in the air and forget about it. This is the nature of things. However, what I would say could be most beneficial is that most people, when they think about changing their lifestyle, they become dieters. And so what they do is they go, let me talk to Latt and listen to Latt. Let me talk to Jade and listen to Jade. Let me read this book. Let me listen to this podcast. Let me watch this documentary. And then what we do from there is we say, okay, I'm going to do that. And if it fails, we start all over again from, the beginning. What I would say is make yourself a living metabolic experiment. I call it becoming the metabolic detective instead of the dieter. And so what you would do is you say, okay, well, I heard this thing from Latt. I'm going to try that. And then what you do, the things that work for you, you keep. The things that don't work for you, you discard, and you always carry along with you the things that you know work. Then you can begin to talk to me and say, well, let's see what Jade has to say. And then you go, well, I will take some of this stuff that Jade said. I will keep some of the stuff that Latt said. I will get rid of some of the things that Jade said, and I will keep doing what I know works for me. And in time, you will begin to develop a lifestyle built for you by you. And from my perspective, this is the right approach given the nature of this. And so, yes, you should be listening to the research. You also should be listening to your own body's reaction. And just to clear this up, and then I'll shut up here, the way that I like to do this is simply look at 3 elements. 1, your biofeedback. How are you feeling? Are you feeling vital? Is your hunger under control? Is your energy stable and predictable? Your cravings under control? Exercise performance, exercise recovery? Are you feeling good? Next is your body attaining or maintaining optimal body composition? And finally, what's going on with your blood labs and vitals? And now we have ways to measure this. You can wear a continuous glucose monitor. You can wear something that measures HRV. You can get your labs done quarterly. And if those 3 things are true, that you're feeling good, you're also looking good, and all of your blood labs and vitals are moving in optimal directions, then you are developing a diet and a lifestyle, to the best of our knowledge, that is going to work for you. And that is going to be different, by the way, than probably what works for me, what works for Latt, and what works for most other people.
Exactly. So no one would know your body better than yourself. And that's the end of it, right? And you try all you can, and throughout your life, there are many, many years to go for you to experiment on your own body, what works for you, what gets you the results that you want. And some people may be able to put on muscles easily, but then you might not want muscles and you want to be lean, and you might try with other methods. And I'm so glad you brought up the biofeedback, because I literally quoted Jade in a presentation last year at the Obesity Help National Conference, where I talked about exploring the use of ketones in helping bariatric surgery patients or post-surgery patients. And as soon as I finished my presentation, I walked off the stage. A lady came up to me and was like, oh, I know that. Like you quoted Dr. Jade Teta. I'm his patient, and I really absolutely adore him. So guys, you know that this doctor is being loved, and he's doing some great work. What are the chances of me giving a talk somewhere and some person in the audience is like, I know this doctor and he's changed my life. So thank you for that, for human race. So Jade, good job there.
I'm incredibly honored by that, Latt, that you shared that at that conference. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the biofeedback system that you just put together, it's not rocket science, right? Everyone knows this. All scientists, all doctors know this, but to put it in simple form and really, teach people to understand their body better and really take in those feedback, and making sure that the feedback are valid feedback, because some feedback could be misleading if you are already in a dysfunctional state. So that's the difference there as well. And ultimately, I think it's just trial and error. Like you said, take what works for you, throw away what doesn't, because not one expert in this world will know your body better than you. Like I may be an expert in physiology, metabolism and ketones, but you might need some other resources from Jade, for example. You might need another resource from Dr. Chris Pharma on mental health, for example. So it's very different, and that's why I love podcasts as a form of masterclass. It's almost like a lecture that you can get in university, but it's a more narrow sort of field, and you can hone into the content that you're consuming.
One of the things I'll just say there real quick, Latt, is that when you, the listener, are thinking about this, I'll just share with you what Latt is referring to, so you can have context to it. Again, this stuff is stuff that all of us know. We just don't always have a way to make it easy for us. And so from my perspective, imagine every meal you have, breakfast, and then you say, what did my hunger level do? Did it rise or did it fall? Was my energy predictable and stable? Were my cravings under control? This is what I would call HEC or HEC. Was my HEC in check or not? That tells you that meal worked for you or not for the time being. Now, of course, you have to correlate that with body composition and blood vitals later. Now, you can add sleep and mood to that. Is your SHMEC in check? Now you can add exercise performance, exercise recovery, libido, erections, digestion, signs and symptoms, headaches, and joint pain. Or in the case we were talking about multiple sclerosis, if you're still having fasciculations and weakness and those are getting worse or they're getting better, this is a relatively good sign that things might be moving in the right direction. But to Latt's point of view, in something like multiple sclerosis, for example, this has a natural wax and wane. We still don't know if that natural wax and wane is lifestyle oriented, but you still need professionals guiding you along, because we definitely can train in these different areas, and we can see how certain diseases affect large averages. And one of the final things I'll say here with research is it is a tool for averages, which means for most people it's going to have use. It's just not a complete tool for individuals. And so you always look at it as a grain of salt. So you're looking at the research, but you're also looking at your body's research. So HEC in check or SHMEC in check are my ways of getting my clients to remember their biofeedback sensations.
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or H.V.M.N. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases. And I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code H.V.M.N Pod20, that is H.V.M.N Pod 20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the H.V.M.N website. Two things to add there. One is that, as you said, when you're looking at research, it's a generalized population. So always go into the methods of the research and look at the population that they do their studies on. If the population resembles you, then you can easily, sort of superimpose the results onto you and try that method and try that protocol. But if they're using elite athletes, and if you're not an elite athlete, then you have to take it with a grain of salt and look at the metabolism of these group of people versus your metabolism. And the second thing I wanted to say is that let's address the elephant in the room here. Why is current medicine, current healthcare system not including lifestyle intervention as a big part of curing chronic diseases? It's because changing lifestyle, asking people to eat less, asking people to eat less processed food is not earning as much money as drugs. Pharmaceutical company, they control the healthcare industry, right? They control the lobbyists, they control the politicians to a certain extent to really push out drugs to cure symptoms instead of addressing the root causes.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Not to mention that there, as we start to learn more and more about special interest in the research domain in general, we start to see that there is an awful lot of incentive there for individual researchers to succumb to people giving them grants and having research studies that are favorable to the people giving them those grants. Now, science in itself, and this is one thing I want to address here because I don't want to start sounding like a conspiracy theorist. One of the things that science is really beautiful about is over time, science always corrects, because what happens is you can have a biased, dogmatic, single individual researcher, but that needs to be corroborated, not just about around in one country or in one domain, but in multiple countries and multiple domains. This is the strength of science. The problem with that is that takes time to corroborate. So in the middle time period, sometimes that can get us in trouble. So what Latt's bringing up here is this idea of, the elephant in the room. That's one particular aspect of it. Also, to let the pharmaceutical companies off the hook a little bit, changing lifestyle and studying lifestyle, as we discussed, is incredibly hard. So that's one big part of it. But the final thing I'd say here, because I actually agree with Latt here, I think that one of the things that we can do as individuals is begin to take full responsibility, not just for what we're doing in our own education here, which I know is a big deal and also can be incredibly difficult, given that there are lots of people out there who are well-intentioned but are giving misinformation. And then there are some people who are not so well-intentioned giving disinformation. And of course, you have to begin to deal with that. But what I would say is here's where the mindset component comes in. From my perspective, when we start talking about politics in a sense, if we take the liberal conservative argument, we know from the research, this is pretty well worked out in psychology research, that liberals in general see causes outside themselves. So they tend to see causes as being social, structural, cultural, institutional. And so they essentially say, let's change the social, cultural, institutional things and we'll solve the problems. Liberals tend to see things that way. Conservatives tend to see things as being, internal. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. It's on you, take responsibility, etc. And we tend to get in these arguments here, one or the other. What I would say is if a holistic way of looking at this, that of course both matter. There is some element of cultural, structural, institutional dysfunction. And there also is an element of personal responsibility. And we as individuals need to integrate both in the same way we integrate things like health and fitness with diet, exercise, and lifestyle habits. Mindset also comes into this. So one of the ways that I deal with this elephant in the room for myself and with patients is I always consider, Jade, you are an experience and an example in the world for everybody. If I don't like what's going on in the for-profit medicine component, then I will not stand for for-profit medicine, right? Think about what happens here. And this is not a conservative liberal issue. This is basically getting into the philosophy of Thoreau, civil disobedience. If you don't like a thing, if you don't like the way the media is, you stop watching that media. You stop giving money to that media. You stop giving attention to that media. If you don't like the way the for-profit medicine system is, you stop giving money to that system. You stop giving attention to that system. And so from my perspective, these are the steps we begin to make in our mindset. And then we also begin to, within ourselves, we begin to say, I will not tolerate disinformation and misinformation within myself. I also will do the work internally, take full responsibility for this, as well as look for the evidence base in the same way someone like Latt and I would be looking at the evidence base in nutrition. What is the evidence base in the politic? Wouldn't it be great, Latt, if our politics had an evidence base? Nothing was done, because from my perspective, I'm neither Democrat or Republican. I don't consider myself liberal or conservative. I want an evidence-based politic. If you tell me that giving a, raising the minimum wage or something like that is going to help, and I have evidence and studies to show that it will, then I'm going to be for it. If you have evidence that shows it won't, I'm going to be against it. I wish it was more this way in politics.
And that's how it should be.
It 100% should be, and I do think the elephant in the room is addressed. And I love that you brought this up, because I do think one of the things that's stressing us out and impacting health and fitness is this argument, this frustration. And I think the solution is two parts. You basically look for the evidence base where our structural institutional centers are dysfunctional, and we begin to vote. Forget team politics. You vote for the evidence base that we know works. And second, we do also take responsibility for this in our mindsets. And this begins to address things. I know for me personally, this is not a Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative argument. I don't like the idea of the pharmaceutical industries being involved in the research and evidence base. Therefore, I will not support for-profit medicine. I don't like it. There are some aspects of it that are good. In general, I think it has been destructive for medicine in general. So I won't vote for someone, liberal or conservative, who is all about for-profit medicine. I will begin to look against that. I will also say it's my responsibility, Jade, to take responsibility for myself, do my research, listen to experts like Latt and others who I can learn from, and design a lifestyle that will keep me healthy so I can do my part. But both matter here. And I do think as humans, as if we don't have enough to worry about, when we begin stressing about these kinds of things that we can't control, the way to get our health back in that regard is say, how can I deal with this? And the way you can deal with it is really begin to become the detective in both regards. Let me do what's going to be best for me personally, so I can do my part for my health, so I can do my part for the healthcare system. And also let me look at the evidence base and make sure I'm voting, putting my attention towards things that are not amplifying disinformation and misinformation, and instead looking very close. And granted, these are hard discussions. However, when you begin to look at it this way, that you are the experience and the example, you begin to be able to feel better about this and have some purpose. And from my perspective, purpose is always what you want to look for, because from my perspective, as someone who's a naturopathic physician and a PhD candidate in psychology, purpose and fulfillment are the number one things, the number one stress shields for everything. Even if we're dying and suffering, purpose is the thing that's going to get us through that and make it have meaning. And so wherever we are, whatever we're doing in all these discussions, I think purpose needs to be where we focus our attention.
Very well said. Very well said. One thing to clarify as well with regards to pharma, I don't want people to think that I am anti-pharma. And what I just talked about is with regards to chronic diseases that can easily be preventable with or curable with lifestyle interventions. I do not deny the importance of pharma and drugs in certain situations, like for example infections. Antibiotics have done great job curing infections. Vaccines, for example, eradicated a lot of epidemics and pandemics in the world. So of course there is room for those drugs and all of that. But with regards to chronic diseases, why we got there to begin with, obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, it's if you drill down to it, it's a lot to do with lifestyle problems. And if it is a lifestyle problem, we should deal with it from a lifestyle perspective.
Yeah, and I like that, Latt, because if you think about it, this is Latt once again being looking at the evidence base. If we look at the evidence base across what has saved more humans, we can essentially argue three things: hygiene, antibiotics, and vaccines. That the evidence base is clear on that. Those three things have probably saved more humans than any other thing on the planet. Now, that doesn't mean we don't continue to look and question new antibiotics, new vaccines, new things. We're always learning, but those we have to look and be honest about the evidence base. And of course, probably the next thing there that everyone seems to be a little bit more tilted towards nowadays is lifestyle. And of course, that matters. We just know a lot less about it because it's so individualized. And so I really like the way you model that. And this is why I think, you and I usually don't always, but we usually vibe on this kind of stuff, because from my perspective, you just illustrated what I mean by honestly looking at the evidence base. There is no denying when you look at the research and when you look at historical medicine, what has saved more lives. There's also no denying that we have a real disconnect and a real problem in lifestyle medicine. So certainly pharma has a role to play. That when they're overstepping in areas, we should call them out. We also should be completely honest about the benefits that they do have. It all needs to be in context.
Absolutely. Very well said. So let's switch gear here a little bit, because I know our audience, our listeners love a little, takeaway from experts like yourself. So as much as we love hearing all these opinions between you and me, we can talk for ages, but I'm sure they're dying to hear about how can they improve their health, right? At the end of the day. So I know you have a book, the Metabolic Effect Diet, eating more, work out less, lose weight even when you are resting. That's like everyone's dream. I mean, I would love to do that. What do you mean by that? Tell us more about this book.
Well, first of all, that's a very old book from 2010. It still is probably the most popular book that I've written. And of course, that's marketing language. But if you just think about it very simply, if you eat more of the right foods, more fiber, more protein, more water-based foods. This would be things like fruits, vegetables, lean protein sources. You will actually end up eating a pretty large volume of food without many calories. So in one sense, it's less food from the calorie perspective, but in another sense, it's more food from the volume perspective. And anyone who's ever lived off the land for any length of time, if you've ever done one of these survival training courses or anything like that, you'll see pretty quickly that if you try to just live off the land, eating nothing but vegetables and lean animals, you're not going to get many calories, yet you'll be getting a lot of roughage. And so you can try this yourself at home. If you just eat nothing but salads with lean chicken breast, you're going to eat a very large volume of food. And when you do the calories, you'll see that it's probably much lower than what you are currently doing. And to be honest, this is what I mean by you can actually eat more volume while doing less, getting less calories. Now, on the other side of things, you can also look at exercise. If you exercise more intensely, you will not necessarily have to exercise more frequently and or longer. So from a time perspective, that is less total volume of exercise, but it actually gives you the same or more benefits of exercise. So let me make this very tangible for you. Here, if you want to try, this is all you have to do. I call it the S diet, and it goes like this: soups, salads, scrambles, shakes, stir fries, skillets. Okay? More specifically, low fat, low starch, soups, salads, scrambles, shakes, stir fries, and skillets. Now, there's nothing wrong with fat. I don't even think there's anything wrong with starch. It's just that when you combine those two, they usually have the most calories. So this is a very high vegetable diet and a very high lean protein diet. Now, if you do soup, salad, scramble, shakes, stir fries, and skillet meals, and nothing but those, you're going to be eating more volume and less calories. And by the way, it's all just salads. A soup is a wet salad. A scramble is an egg salad. A salad is a salad. A smoothie, shakes, those are just fruit salads, right? Skillet meals, they're hot salads. So it's all just salads with protein. Add on to that 3 times per week of a 30-minute, fast-paced resistance training workout, something akin to high-intensity interval training with weights, and you have an idea of what I tend to do with my clients. In my mind, what we're doing that's causing the issue is most people think metabolism is about calories, or they think metabolism is about hormones, or they think metabolism is about fast or slow. Metabolism is about stress management. That is what it is. It is a stress sensing and responding apparatus. So taking yourself from a couch potato, which is one form of stress, to a crossfitting paleo man overnight is another source of stress. The gap between calorie intake and output is a major stress for the metabolism. And so all we're essentially doing here is we're saying, let's move to the middle. Let's basically consume more volume of food so you're not so hungry and craving everything like crazy. You're getting plenty of protein and fiber and those kinds of things. And let's also move your exercise back to 3 times per week and spend less time so that you don't feel like it is overwhelming and you're not trying to go from a couch potato to a cross-fitting paleo person. Follow that S diet, do 3 intense, workouts with weights per week. And let me just be a little bit more particular there, because that should be individualized too. Very simple. How do you individualize it? Push until you can't, rest until you can. If I was working out with you and Latt was working out with me and you, what will happen is maybe I'll rest first. Latt will keep going and you'll keep going. But then when I rest, maybe when I start working again, then you rest, right? And we're all going at our own pace, pushing until we can't, resting until we can. So you just go through the workout, stop and rest when you need to, pick it back up right where you left off. That's how these workouts are done. And this is a very simple way in my mind to begin some of the general lifestyle elements that seem to, for most people, provide the most health benefits. And of course, within that, there's time for any other types of dietary regimes you want to experiment with. Remember, we're being metabolic detectives. Maybe you want to try intermittent fasting. Try it. See how it works for you. Maybe you want to do keto, approach like that. Try it. See if it works for you. Maybe you want to try this supplement or that supplement. Beautiful. Try it. I am program agnostic in terms of there is no one way to do things. I don't know what the right thing for your metabolism is, but I know your metabolism will tell you. And so remember, what I'm telling you here with this S diet and these workouts, that's just the beginning. The rest comes in what Latt and I talked about before, where you basically find what is useful, discard what is not, and then add what is uniquely your own, which, by the way, is an amazing quote by Bruce Lee, the philosopher, actor, and, sort of martial artist. Find what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. So whenever you hear someone like me give you, hey, do this S diet and do this, from my perspective, always try to remember it's just the starting point. The rest of it's going to be you tweaking, adjusting, reacting, adapting based on your H.V.M.N responses, based on your body composition responses, and based on your blood lab responses. And that'll get you in the ballpark as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jade. Now, I often tell my audience that try not to do too many changes, try not to make too many changes and do too many things at the same time. Because if you're doing intermittent fasting and keto diet and high intensity all at once in first week, one go, like you're going to break yourself and you're not going to have enough time to recover and your body's going to react in a very negative way. So my question to you is that all these advices that you give, what should people focus on first if they are just starting, right? Should they focus on just being active? Should they focus on their diet or anything else?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So here's how I do this. Think of it in 4 buckets. There's mindset and mindfulness. These are all the things that we do to reduce stress. This would be spa time, massage, flexibility stuff, going for walks in nature, time with pets, physical affection, all of these kinds of things that reduce our stress output. So I call that mindfulness. Now think about meals, what you're eating. That's number 2. Number 3 would be movement. This isn't exercise, by the way. This is just, are you walking? Are you getting 10,000 steps in a day? And the 4th one is metabolics. How often are you exercising? What I want you to do is mark these from 1 to 10. 10, you've got them nailed. You feel like they're perfect. 1, I don't do well with it at all. What are you on mindfulness? 1 to 10. If you're a 1 on mindfulness, that gives you the place where you need to start, right? And so you go through each of these. What am I on meals? 10 to 1. 10, I'm perfect. 1, I suck, right? What am I on movement? 10, I'm perfect. 1, I'm not very good. What am I on metabolics? 10 to 1. And what I would say is you pick the lowest 1 and you begin with that. Now, what if you say, well, Jade, they're all 1 for me, right? They're all 1 for me. So where would I start? I think the place to start for most people, and this is going to surprise anyone who listens to this, and it may surprise Latt, is mindfulness is the one that I would start with. And the reason why is because from my perspective, the metabolism is a stress sensing and responding apparatus. So what I would want you to do is to begin spending time in nature, going for walks, sleeping extra time, picking up meditation, finding all the ways that you can to relax, sauna therapy, anything that you can do to relax your system. That would be, if all of them are equal, that would be where I would start. Next, from there, I would say movement. So if we're looking at these in a hierarchy, a pyramid now, I would say mindfulness is most important. Movement next. Get your 10,000 steps in. From there, start focusing on your meals. And last, start focusing on your exercise. And now, surprisingly, if you look at this, what do people normally think? They normally think exactly in the reverse. I'll focus on exercise first, then I'll focus on my meals, then maybe I'll start walking some more. And then as a sort of afterthought, I'll start trying to reduce stress. To me,
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, to me, it's the exact opposite.
No, I definitely feel that, even up until recently, I definitely feel like, okay, if I want to lose weight, if I want to get to a certain body goal, I'm going to up my exercise first, and then I'm going to dial in my nutrition. And then maybe I'll talk about, think about walking and movement, and then I'll do the meditation. But as of like last year or so, it definitely has changed, and it definitely helps me positioning and having that mindset, like really doing meditation and viewing the whole thing as how I want to live my life. And that is being set during my meditation period. And then that sort of carries on onto other aspects of life.
And look, here's the reason why, because a lot of people would argue with me here, but I'll give you one final sort of thing that makes me, I go like this. For weight loss in particular, now I'm talking about health and fitness and weight loss, but for weight loss in particular, anyone can lose weight for a time. Just starve yourself and run marathons, right? You will lose weight. If I throw you in a concentration camp, you're going to lose weight. That's not necessarily easy to attain weight loss, but the hardest thing is to sustain weight loss. It's the consistency over time. And the whole industry completely negates this. They're mainly focused on attaining weight loss when we know that 1-year failure rates are 95%, 2-year failure rates 97%, 3-year failure rates 99%. Why? Because people do exactly that. They focus on the wrong things. We need the behaviors in place that will help the metabolism keep staying with H.V.M.N in check, staying with optimal body composition. We need to make it last. If the metabolism, based on my hypothesis, is primarily a sensing and responding apparatus to stress, then the first move to keep us strong and stable and sustaining any lifestyle over the long run is to manage stress. And that means we focus on that first. We focus on stress reduction first. That will help us maintain any weight loss that we may achieve.
Now, great segue here, talking about, the mindset and, how you view things and the psychology and the mental state and well-being. I'm going to be the scientist, and I've got my own thoughts about this, but I want to hear your thoughts. I'm going to be the scientist and ask, the thing about mindset, how much of it is just willpower and how much of it is tied to metabolism?
To me, this is a really difficult conversation to tease this out, right? And it even goes into the philosophy of materialism, i.e. the brain creates consciousness, versus idealism, whereas the brain is a filter for consciousness. It even gets to that particular question. But from my perspective, with most things, it's both and probably some aspect that we don't quite understand. But if we're going to be trying to design a study here, I would need your help, Latt, and a bunch of other people to try to help begin to tease out these particular mechanisms. I don't know that we can necessarily answer that question. However, here's how I look at it, right? Like, for example, in my PhD research, one of the things that I want to do is I want to take people and simply focus on purpose and meaning. So, for example, one of the things I know about Latt, that he knows about me, that we know about all of you, and that all of you know about us, is that we all suffer. As humans, this is the nature of life. The Buddhists say life is dukkha. Life is suffering. So the idea then becomes suffering is also a form of stress. And certainly, mindset-wise, we can it's not just what happens to us, it's the meaning we put behind what happens to us. So what if we took a group of people, Latt, and this will be an experiment that you can sort of tear apart, and all your listeners can see what the weaknesses are here. But what if we took two groups of people? We know they suffer. One group, we go, let's take your deepest suffering, your betrayals, your hurts, your childhood wounds, all this kind of stuff, and let's help you get in touch with those and find other people out in the world who suffer the same thing, and you set your task to be an altruistic and generous and giving to those people. So you use your hurt to help people rather than use your hurt to hurt people. And we have one of those groups where that's the only intervention that we do. And then and they get some general diet advice, okay? And the next group, we go, we want you to follow this diet, specifically this low calorie diet. And we follow those two groups for a year and see what happens. I want to know what happens to those two groups. My hypothesis says that the group who is in their deep purpose will have better metabolic markers, will be healthier and happier, including in all the things that people like you and I care about, insulin resistance, blood glucose levels, all these things, than the person where we just focused on a reduced calorie diet. And I want to do studies like that. Studies like that might tell us the degree to which this is not just about the A, B, C's and 1, 2, 3s of do X and do Y in your diet, but also why are you doing it? So in this intervention group, we would say, by the way, as you begin to help the world through your unique purpose, understand that you're going to need vitality. You're going to need energy. The more vital you are, the healthier you are, the better you'll be able to do this work. I think that is going to be a far more impactful tool and motivation for these individuals over the long run than simply telling them to change their diet. So this is one way we might begin to tease something like this out.
Absolutely. I love the idea, Jade. I think we know enough and we have enough data now that we are able to take two opposite school of thought that have produced results and then put them together in a study and look at what actually differentiates them. Is it their intervention that makes the difference, or is it something else that is deeper than that? And to be able to tease that. So for example, I had an interview with these two gentlemen talking about using high carb diet to combat diabetes, right? And then obviously we know that there's enough data on using low carb, high fat diet to combat diabetes. They both showed great results. Now, what if we put them together in one study and then manipulate that and look at the differences in, say, mindset or psychological state, or look at other aspects of life of these patients and see how much of that diet actually carries weight versus just them being, in a much better mental well-being, for example. So this is exactly that. It's using, naturopathic medicine, lifestyle intervention versus evidence-based medicine or conventional medicine that's just, prescribing a diet or prescribing a drug or semaglutide, and then put them together in different arms in a study and then see what the result is. I think this will absolutely tell us way more than what we have been doing science so far. And I think science ought to move that way, especially when we're talking about the wholesome view of health, human health in general, because of all these different aspects are basically interconnected. And if we are to address one, we can't ignore the other.
Yeah, and to bring up some of the objections that some people listening to this might be having right now, one of the things that is crucial to understand is the placebo effect is probably the most powerful effect in all of medicine. I mean, all of our studies have to address the placebo effect, upwards of 30% response rate in every single study for the placebo. And so in a sense, what Latt and I are talking about here from my perspective is partly trying to tease apart the placebo effect. What is it that in your example, Latt, what people would say is, oh, it's not the high carb diet and it's not the high fat diet that is doing it. It's the combination of carbs and fat that is the real problem, which it might be, by the way. That hypothesis may turn out to be true. However, another hypothesis is that it's the belief about the diet. I believe the high carb diet is effective for me, therefore it works for me. Or I believe the high fat diet is effective for me, therefore it works for me. And I would love to begin to look at which is which. We still, in my mind, have not yet teased out the combination of starch and fat, which still needs to be worked out. My hypothesis is that is going to be a major piece to this, partly just because it raises calories. The other thing we need to do is take into account this belief effect. And let's be frank, medicine certainly does not have a way really to do this in an adequate way yet. It's not magic. Every study in the world, any well-done study uses the belief effect, uses the placebo effect, must account for the placebo effect. So from my perspective, This is the real elephant in the room, so to speak, the hidden thing that's standing right in front of us that we know we have to account for, that no one actually goes, wait a second. If the placebo effect is so powerful in all of our studies, and it's simply the positive belief effect, then if I have someone who positively believes they're making a difference in the world and can tie that to their lifestyle, I can see perhaps a better intervention. Now, of course, as an evidence-based guy, I leave all that out there to be like, maybe, let's see. And then let's trust the data rather than our bias and our dogma.
Absolutely. That's great closing remark there for you. Now, as we're running out of time here, I want to open up the floor for you, Jade. If there's anything else you want to share with our audience, before we press record, you were talking about the next level human, and please share with our audience, where can they find you as well if they want more information about Dr. Jade Teta?
Yeah, Latt, I don't know that I have anything else to add. I mean, I always love chatting with you. It brings out just amazing discussions. I guess the final thing I would do is just say all of this is important. I would start to say that I hope that the health and fitness industry and all of you listening who are acting as metabolic detectives yourself really start looking at your responses to stress and the way your metabolism responds to that. And to me, a lot of that's going to be about belief. So begin to consider that if you haven't before. This is the work of the next level human. To me, the next level human is someone who simply seeks to grow themselves so that they can positively contribute to others and evolve the world. That's really what it's about. And so everything Latt and I are talking about today is really the path of the next level human. For those of you who want any more of my work, jadeteta.com is my website. I have a podcast, the Next Level Human Podcast, which Latt actually did an amazing popular episode on my show. So definitely go check him out there. And then you can find me at Jade Teta on all of the social medias. And by the way, I answer to Teta or Teta, the correct pronunciation of my name.
I was going to say, why didn't you correct me if I have mispronouncing your name?
Yeah, because the correct pronunciation actually is Teta, because I am Italian. But for some reason, my parents and when we came over, changed it to Teta. So I answer to Teta, or Teta. It's all the same to me.
It's like how my American friends would laugh at me when I say beta, because that's how the British would say it when I studied in the UK, and they would say the beta cells in the pancreas, in the pancreas, and they're like, oh, beta, that's not better. But thank you so much. I digress. Thank you so much for being on H.V.M.N Podcast, and it has been a wonderful conversation, and we've learned so much from you, and so many takeaways that our audience can actually use in their daily. So thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Latt. Appreciate you.